Hey guys, SoCal Val here. You are listening to the Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast.
And that has been a great hour. I could have gone longer, but I could talk to you for a day, but we're not going to have the time.
I'm pretty long-winded on stuff too.
I don't mind that. You probably guessed I'm just sitting there going, yeah. It's like this tunnel. It's a bit like when I watch wrestling, I'm tunnel vision because I'm into it and I don't do the chanting or anything like that. I'm just I don't have a phone in my hand. I'm just literally watching.
Yes.
I'm just
me on the apron.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm just literally listening and taking it all in. So I'm not being rude, or I'm just letting you go because
not at all.
So now we're going to revert way back before the first ECW run. You're a dynamic dude on a skateboard with Johnny Oates in WCW. How on earth did this get pitched?
I got to correct you. Oh. Not on a skateboard. I would carry my skateboard.
Carry Joe. That was it. Yes.
The reason being, first of all, we weren't skateboarders, right? And remember I said earlier about playing rules that you're not adept at. And when they put us together, John and I got along great. I think there was a look there. There was a definite reaction from the audience. And the whole idea was, from that we were told anyway, was that they wanted something new to replace what the Rock and Roll Express had been. Another tag team that we can build this into. And we debuted. First of all, they spent a ton of money on us. All those vignettes you see us buying stuff, we're actually buying that stuff with the corporate card from the company. And Johnny had done that intentionally. Johnny was a little bit savvier on the business side of things at that point. And he said, well, if they tell us no, we'll see that the investment isn't there. And I think we spent like $6,000 the first day and not a blink. So they had doing all these vignettes, us on the skis and jet skis and riding the motorcycles and doing all that. There was a lot of time invested. And we had debuted at Music City Showdown, which was the pay-per-view, where Terry Funk Powell drove Flair through the table and broke his hip. We had debuted that night working with Paul Heyman, oddly enough, and the Samoan SWAT team. And it was Johnny and Shane, either the new generation or the next generation. Got a great reaction from the audience, and Samoan SWAT team, Fatu and Sammy, really flew for us, busted their ass for us. And the morning following, we get in the shuttle van to go to the airport. And Johnny and I are in the second seat. Eddie Gilbert sitting in the passenger seat up front. You had to understand and know Eddie. Eddie had a very dry sense of humor, very droll. And he said, well, did you hear your new name? And I'm thinking, okay, we debuted last night, right? Okay. So I said, okay, Eddie, I'll bite. What's our new name? And he said, well, your new name's the Dynamic Dudes. And we both started laughing, right? Because it was A, so corny, B, silly. And, and we keep laughing. And Eddie turned around and gave us like one of these looks. And like, that was just like, hey, I'm being serious. And I said, please tell me you're fucking ribbing. And he went, so where the hell did that come from? He said, Jim Hurd, the pizza executive. Remember Jim Hurd from Pizza Hut?
I've listened to Cornette rant about him for hours.
And I think rightfully so. Look, I'm sure in his own way was good at what he did. But as I always say in our business, I think it's so condescending to our business to say, I've been a great executive, like my manager works at Toyota. I've been a great executive there. I'm going to run wrestling, or we're going to hire him to run wrestling. There are some things that just don't translate. Ours is not a pure sport, so being a great athlete is a part of it. It's not pure acting, so being an actor is part of it. But then there's a whole lot of this gray stuff in the middle that sort of like swims back and forth. And if you're not aware of all those things and understand the nuances of creating characters and things, you can be a Doink the Clown, or you can be a gobbledygook or whatever. But to actually come up with a character that has meat on the bones, that's somewhat different from things that came before it, that entices the audience to sit there and go, what's this guy about? Or what's this lady about? But I always like to make sure I say this so we don't get canceled or somebody says something different. When I say the boys, I mean everybody in the dressing room, the men, the women, the staff. The boys are the boys that help us run the company. What makes that person compelling that you won't take your eyes off that person? And I think Jim Herd, his own way, had no clue of that. I've been great at pizza. Pizza's a little different than wrestling, and vice versa. But Eddie had told me that he had commissioned that summer what were the 10 or 20 hottest words in California, with the thought being, and generally is true, what starts in California sort of disseminates later down the road. What's hot in California now, 6 months later will be hot in New York City. And the first 2 words on the list were dynamic and dude, or dude and dynamic, whatever the number 1 and 2 was. And so in his infinite pizza wisdom, he decided to take the top 2 words and throw them together. Thank God it wasn't, like dynamic jackass or something, right? It would have.
Well, it could have been the ding dongs or the hunchbacks.
yeah, exactly. Amen. Yeah, because God knows he would have done it. Ding dongs and such. So Eddie, at that point, as he pitched it to us, said, "Don't panic. I want to turn you guys heels." And he had envisioned this complete change. Long black robes, long hairs, slick back, and going more in the vein of a Midnight Express as opposed to Rock and Roll Express. 2 iconic, incredibly iconic tag teams that I think by that time the company was like, okay, these guys have been around for a while and they're starting. They're still over, right? Those guys, but it was time now for the business to start coming up with the next stuff and let these guys ride off into the sunset. And of course, Eddie would get fired before that happened. And but he was the first that had seen me as a heel and formulated that idea. That night we were in Tri-Cities, Tennessee. It'll pop my head in a second. Ric Flair was the head of the booking committee. Yes. The infamous booking committee. And in this building, they had, the dressing rooms were up on the 2nd floor, but then there was a 3rd floor, sort of like a storage area, had a couch and stuff up there. And that's where Ric Flair always dressed. So I had asked, time to meet with him and everything. And I sat down with him and I said, this name, it's the shits. You know as well as I do, that's the shits. Anyway, not nothing to do about it. It's out of my hands. Now, I'm sure if Ric Flair would have gone to Jim Herd and said, hey, I think the next or new generation was better than this, or, call them hunchbacks, whatever, but it's something better than this, and disavowed himself from it. And that was like one of those things that sort of like dropped him down a notch to me, that, nobody's challenging for your spot. It's like I said with ECW earlier, if everybody in the card is over, that's only good for the company. It's only good for the fans. If it's good for the company and the boys and the fans, there's no loser. And, and he would have nothing to do with it. And Johnny and I would do the best we could to try to get that over. But I couldn't ride that skateboard to save my life. And plus at TV, WWF, I think, was a bit more professional. There were, this huge ramp and then these big television cables running all over the place. You couldn't ride it if you wanted to. And so once we started going around, they had me, Johnny, Tom Zank, Brian Pillman, and Brad Armstrong on the Great American Bash Tour. They would have us go to the building at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They'd have a big meet. And they were selling hand over fist of this merchandise. So during this entire thing, we're working our way across the country. We ended up in San Francisco. And a couple kids came through and they were speaking gibberish. I mean, it didn't discern any words to me. And, Johnny and I both looked at them like, had no clue what they were saying. Here they were actual skaters speaking skater lingo. And in that moment, they knew we were frauds. Neither of us were skaters. Neither of us had any inkling on any of that. And I think that was what started really pulling that character or that team down a few notches. Neither of us knew it. Neither of us wanted to be that. And yet suddenly we were, thrust into this direction that neither of us had a clue what it was or what it should be.
Yeah, so you also started feuding with the Midnight a little bit. You had Cornette that was kind of in the middle at this point. He was, I think, at one point he was going to turn with you guys, and then it didn't. The crowd didn't get into that for some unknown reason. They sort of portrayed the Midnight more than you.
Yeah, I think long term the idea was always to keep him with the Midnight Express.
Yeah,
and the way we were portraying it and playing it, I think. It would have been very interesting had he done that, and then we turned heels after that. But there was still a lot of money left in the Midnight Express, and that had been his bread and butter. So I'm sure with him also on the booking committee, I'm sure he was able to keep steering that over. Then we, at that same time, I don't know if this could have been by design. It would have been far too advanced for WCW. But we started hitting all those Northeast towns: Philadelphia, Utica, New York, Buffalo, Rochester, New York. The Northeast in America, those are heel towns. And suddenly you got this cornball lollipop tag team coming in here, and really was not going to work there. And aside from the fact, we weren't over long before that. Once we launched and started here, from there, it was just a downward trajectory because the way we were being booked on the weekly television, booked in the houses, and the way they were portraying these characters, it was doomed to fail from the start. But we got to upstate New York, and we were wrestling the Twin Towers. Big Sid and Danny Spivey. Well, Danny ended up getting hurt, and the first night we were working, Sid ended up breaking my elbow. The crowd started, Sid. And I remember him going like blank, like he was stoned or something, right? And he grabbed me by the hair hard and threw me to the floor. And I'm giving him the odds on his boot and everything. And I hit the floor, and he comes out, and the crowd's chanting louder and louder. And he's got this glazed look in his eye. And he grabs me by the hair again and said, "I'm throwing you out." I said, "We are out." We weren't allowed over the railing at this time. And he starts to throw me towards the railing. So I'm intending to take the railing sort of like a front turnbuckle. And as big and strong as he is, as he's throwing me, he one swoop reaches under, picks me over his head, and throws me straight up in the air. I'm coming down, the railing's right below me. I'm trying to get my bearing. I'm turned sideways. Last second to protect my ribs, I pulled my arms in. My elbow hit the railing, and that was it. I was done. And Cornette came around and hit him with his racket and cussed him out. And we got back in and finished. Well, I was, of course, done. And Danny got hurt that night. No, I got hurt. So they took Danny out. Rather than Danny who could work, they put Sid in there. So the next night we're in Buffalo, New York. And it's Johnny versus Sid. So it's a curtain sellout, right? The boys are on the back watching. And a few minutes into the match, he throws Johnny in the clothesline and hits him right here. And you see the big spray of red, and broke Johnny's nose. So in 2 days, the dudes were completely wiped out, broken elbow, broken nose. And so it wasn't going to work from the start.
Yeah, and it wasn't long before Johnny Ace would then go to All Japan. Not long after that. Then there was a bit of a bet was particularly going to get a big push. It didn't happen. Where politics, whatever you want to call it.
I'd actually quit.
Yes.
Based off that, the month that I was off, I was getting my knee scoped. We were working in Bluefield, West Virginia, me and Johnny, and I used to do a spot where the heel would shoot me to the turnbuckle, and I would jump straight to the top turnbuckle. And with Bobby, whose timing and movements were so impeccable, I would do a crossbody to him on the floor. While in Bluefield, they had moved the pads in, and so it was only about like 2 feet of the pads showing. And I didn't realize that until I hit him, and he went down. My knee pad had slid down during the match and went right into the concrete floor. I had blood clots on my knee, so I had to go get those removed. I was going to be out for like 2 or 3 weeks, and a month maybe. And while I'm off, I'm getting phone calls from the office. And these phone calls are not very complimentary to like Luger and Sting, saying they were prima donnas and they weren't business and blah, blah, blah. Telling me then, when you come back, excuse me, we're going to break you and Johnny up and give you a big singles push. The first night I'm back is in Baton Rouge, and I'm in catering in the afternoon. And Missy Hyatt comes out. We've been friends since UWF. She just come out of the booking meeting, and she sits down at the table and she said, "Boy, they were talking terrible about you in that meeting." And at that moment, I'm thinking, okay, like maybe she misunderstood, but Airhead, used to play the Airhead. And so I went looking for Jim Ross, and en route, I run into Teddy Long and Mark Callis. And he said, "Okay, Shane, as far as I know, he's just the manager. He's got a clipboard." And he starts telling me, "Okay, tonight, match 3 or whatever, you're working with Mark. He'll beat you in 2 minutes with a heart punch. I'll put him over, and he ain't beat me that way." And because remember, I'm being told for a month I'm getting this big singles push. So I go find Jim Ross, and Jim Ross goes, "That's not what I told him. Go talk to what the hell again names? The assassin. His son was the referee.
I can't remember his name.
I'm horrible with names anymore. And it'll pop in my head in a second, but I went and found him, and I remember as I was talking to him, he wouldn't even look at me. He like staring down and talking to me. And he finally said, again, "Well, if you know what's good for you, you'll do what you're told, and you'll like it." And I said, "You must if an ass walk out of here." I threw a garbage can at him. He went and got my bags, and Wahoo, who I greatly respected, stopped me. "Kid, you're making a mistake. Don't walk out on the contract." I said, "I'm done with this shit." I'd had it. And then Johnny and Tom Zank and Brian Pillman came and said basically the same thing. I'd already made up my mind at that point. So I get in the car and I go to the Baton Rouge airport, and I call Eddie Gilbert, who was still in the office at the time. At this time, we were getting reports that what was being decided in the office was being changed in the field. And then they would put the heat, like say I was supposed to win and I would lose, they'd put the heat on Mark Callis or whatever. So I talking to Eddie said, "Well, don't fly home tonight. Fly to Atlanta, come meet with Jim Ross or Jim Hurd tomorrow morning." So I did. And this is the meeting where I walk in and Jim Hurd starts lecturing me. He knows who I've been talking to, and I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my career. And he's got something to show me. He's looking through his file cabinet, and he pulls out a piece of paper, and he goes to hand it to me. As I reach for it, he pulls it back, and he goes, "Now, you probably won't be able to understand this, being that you're a wrestler." Yeah, that's a good way to endear yourself to the franchise, right? It's I said, "I'm reading goddamn thing you have on your desk." So I'm looking at it, and they've got the WWF ratings at the top, which was like 7 point something, and then they have WCW, Memphis, Mid-South, Portland. They've got like 5 or 6 or 7 grouped together, and they still cumulatively were less than WWF. And he's telling them to make a mistake. I said, "Do you understand what's on this paper? Because it ain't what you're thinking it is." And that's how I left WCW with him. And I've been talking to Pat Patterson every couple of months. I just check in, "Hey, how you doing?" That kind of thing. Never once asked for a job. I was more like looking for advice. And he'd ask me, "How's your workouts going?" That kind of thing. It was just very, very general talks. We never once spoke about a job until the last time I called him. And he said, "Well, we'll bring you in for TV and see what we have." So there was no promise of a spot that first time. It was just an opportunity that was being given. The money was great. I had phenomenal people to work with. Playboy Buddy Rose, Haku, Barbarian.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really, really good talent. And fun. I had a lot of fun up there the first time. And I left about a year and a half in when my dad had come down with the emphysema and had to leave and go teach. So that was a quick hopscotch from WCW to WWF and then moving on what would later become not too long ECW.
Yes, and it was Jody Hamilton
Jody Hamilton. There you go. Yeah, too many chair shots, right?
Yeah, it just popped into. Because as I said before, I've watched a lot of shooting interviews. I was just trying to think who Jim Cornette was always talking about in it, and it was Jody Hamilton. So I managed to.
Yes.
So we've covered off covered off nicely the first one in your first run in WWF. You had quite a long stint in the Rumble that year, about 26 minutes. I think you were number 17, and he was about 6 minutes in. Anyway, so you leave, obviously, like you said, you look after your father, do a bit of teaching. What made you return back to WCW in '92?
Marty Jannetty had called me. You know, it wasn't like we just dropped out. The guys I'd been friends with, I'd stayed in contact with. But I really was enjoying teaching. It wasn't in my field. I was teaching special ed at the time. My field's social studies, sciences, and so but I enjoyed it. It was just complete left field, different change to me. But I enjoyed the challenge of it. I enjoyed the kids. I enjoyed the structure of it. I was working at that time teaching for at that time in Pennsylvania, special ed classes. Every county has what's called an intermediate unit, and the intermediate unit would oversee the special ed. So I was hired, and they had to get an emergency certificate for me because nobody would cover this class. But it was much more like when I had gone to school. And my bosses gave me great support. I had really good success with the kids. So it would be after that I was teaching in my field, social studies, hired by a different school district at that time, Beaver area schools, which is the county seat where we live. And Marty Jannetty was calling and said that he had spoken to Kip Fry, and they wanted to rebuild the rockers. And if you remember early in my first run in WWF, when Sean had gotten hurt, they had me replace him. Yes, I was sort of like the third wheel. And so he had gotten an offer of $5,000 a week. And as much as I enjoyed teaching, that kind of money to me was an enticement. That was a lot more than we'd ever made. I'd ever made at that point. And $5,000 a week. And they were generally a television company by that time. It wasn't like they were doing a heavy road schedule. So, $5,000, and then in my head, I'm trying to think, like, could I do possibly both teaching and that? And I'd already put my resignation notice in. And that was the week that Marty Jannetty had a party at his house, and a girl ends up dead at the house. So Kip Fry right away pulls back, we ain't doing that. And I called him. I said, look, I've already resigned from my job. I can't go back very well and say, hey, take me back. And so they brought me in. They brought Bill Watson to replace Kip Fry. And that was another enticement to me because I'd worked for Bill before. As tough as Bill was to work for at that time, you learned a lot from him. He knew how to run a company. And so like those two things going together, really drew me in. When I first got there, it was I had the match with Brian Pillman on center stage, Bob Orton as a singles, and it was not long. I didn't have a whole lot of singles matches, and they came up with the idea of putting me and Ricky together.
Yes,
and my God, who wouldn't want to work with Ricky Steamboat, right? I mean, just a great talent, phenomenal talent, and equally a great guy. Just a guy you really enjoyed being around, but also somebody you could learn an awful lot from. And Ricky's very much a teacher. So I find out at that time Ricky was making hundreds of thousands of dollars. Brian and Steve, I think, were making like $225 to $250, and I was making $300 a night. And so I went to Bill Watson. I said, "This ain't, I'm 25% of that match, and I'm not saying I deserve more than any of those guys, but I certainly deserve to be at least in the ballpark." And he told me that the WCW, they hired him, didn't give him a budget the first quarter, but he said, if you hang in there for me until the second quarter, you and Ricky are going to be over a lot more, and I promise you we'll get you into that ballpark. Well, the second quarter came, and the same kind of foot dragging. But he told me third quarter for sure. And I said, if it's another foot drag, I quit. I'll tell you now, I'm quitting. And he had gotten fired or left right as that quarter would wrap up, Ole was put in charge. And Ole said, well, yeah, come down to the office Monday. We'll talk about it. And I got there and I told him, and he said, well, you know, when I was your age, that's what I was making. I don't know what you're complaining about. Excuse me? When you were my age, you know, hotel room was probably $10 a night. You know, rental car was probably $5. And your three partners in the ring weren't making 2, 3, 4, 5, 600,000 a year. And finally did get me a contract and got me up into that ballpark with those guys. And it wasn't long after that they broke us up. And I had spoken about that earlier with the Dos Hombres. Bill, during that time, what's noteworthy is Bill Watts had called me to the office several times during the run with Steamboat. And the first time was when we would go and do the promos, especially market specifics, you might have 30 promos to do. You know, one for Pittsburgh, one for Raleigh, one for here, one for there, each one a different television station and everything. And 30 seconds, sometimes 60. And for two of us talking, Steamer doesn't like to do promos. He's never been comfortable with them, doesn't enjoy doing them. So he said, I've been watching your promos, you and Ricky said, I want you to start it, give him a bit in the middle, and then you finish it because they keep it tight on time. When the last time he called me to the office was on a Saturday. And, you know, with Bill, you know, I'm sure you've heard plenty of stories about his management style, we'll put it. Yeah. And I'm thinking I'm being called there. Like, what did I do wrong? They're going through, like, did I Hill hotels or there was none of that. And I knew I hadn't done anything. So I was curious why I was going. CNN Center was locked. It was closed. It wasn't open on the weekends. So I have to go to security. Security takes and walks me up. The lights are all out in the place. And I walk into Bill's office. His briefcase is sitting on his desk. It's open. And there's a handgun sitting right on top. And he's out on the balcony peeing off the balcony in downtown. What is this strange? So I sit down and wait. He comes in and he sits down behind the desk and he said, has anybody ever told you you're a stone cold fucking heel? So I've been watching your promos and anybody ever told you that? I said, yeah, Eddie Gilbert. I said it. He goes, well, I'm thinking about breaking you and Ricky up and putting you with Brian Pillman and calling you guys the Hollywood Blondes. Well, Brian and I got along great. So that was fascinating. But with Bill, you were never quite sure if it was a test. Yeah. Is he quizzing you somehow? So he said, what do you think about that? And I thought about it for a second. I went, I don't think the fans will buy it. He goes, why not? I said, I think the fans still very much see Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas. I hadn't yet gotten to his level. And his answer to me was, he put his cowboy boots up on the desk and crossed his feet. He leaned back in his chair and he said, I always knew you were going to be the one that picked it up. So I don't know to this day if it was a test or what. That's how Steve Austin got put into the role with Brian. Yeah. And it still worked great for us because I still got to work with Ricky Steamboat and we had a phenomenal team to play off of. So it worked either way for me. But he had been the second person to say that, and being that it came from Bill Watts, had started planting that seed at some point down the road, which I think lends back into what I said earlier about, you know, being hooked in by ECW to be the lead heel. Yeah, exactly that. And it goes on for a bit longer. And then obviously you go back to ECW, which we know about. And then we get to the fun part. Okay, so back into WWF at this point, it's more clicky with a Q, shall we say. Clicky with a Q. You get given a gimmick because obviously you've been a teacher anyway, so it kind of makes sense. Right. But as I said, it's clicky. And for some unknown reason, you and Mr. Michaels didn't get along for whatever reason. And you never really got where you should have got in a WWE. I've always believed that you as a character should have been higher up the card. You should have probably been world champion, not in the Continental. But nevertheless, in the Continental title at that stage was still very prestigious in wrestling at that point. It is now, thanks to the champion it is now. Right. The Kliq in general just seemed to be people that if a certain somebody didn't get his own way, he would cry, lose his smile, go home, or whatever he would do. Yeah. Did you ever feel at any point that you
I'm going to say, pissed him off to a degree that, was there any particular time in your mind that thought, oh, hang on a minute, that's where it was and that's where the problem lied?
Yeah. No, when I'd gone up there, I had been in 1990 when I was in WWF. Me, Marty, Sean, and Dustin, everybody called us the Four Amigos because where you saw one of us within 20 feet, the other three were.
Yeah.
And we all got along great traveling. And you know, when you're running the roads like that with people, you really get to know them. We'd come to Pittsburgh. I'd give them my brother was a set designer in Hollywood, big old house up on the hill. I'd give them the keys and drop them off. Hey, I didn't walk in with them and say, okay, you're in this room. Make yourselves at home. You know, want something to drink, want something to eat, whatever. I mean, that was the kind of relationship we had. So when I went, and same thing with Scott Hall when he was the Diamond Stud, would always travel with me and Johnny. Same thing, got along great. So I had no reason to have my guard up or be leery of any of these guys. And early on, the first few months I was there, we were doing just the vignettes. And once I started on the road, I started the semi-main event with working with Razor.
Yes.
And the first night that I was on the road, I think it was Lansing, Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. And we had gotten called, me and Bob Backlund, because he was the one who supposedly gave me the Board of Education. And X-Pac was with Sean Walton was with Scott. And Bill was in the first aid room, like down on the floor of first aid room, just off to the side. As I recall, it was a long, thin room. And at the far end of the room, there was a gurney that went pretty much wall to wall. And Bill was standing about mid-room, and Scott Hall was sitting on the gurney. And, you know, he's sitting there, he's having his good, playing bongo drums on the side of the gurney. Sean had gotten there, and we were waiting for Bob to come. And Bill starts. And he said, okay, tonight, the summer main event, Shane, it's going to be you versus Scott. And he's looking around and stuff. And he pauses for a second. The whole time, Scott's over there, big old smile on his face, and he's having a good time. Bill pauses and goes, Shane, what do you use for a finish? And as soon as he said that, Scott's demeanor visibly changed. I remember like being perplexed by that. You know, by this stage of our career, I certainly know that when I'm winning, I'm not really winning. And when I lose, I'm not really losing. It's a show. And I remember thinking, oh, it was odd. That night in the ring, now remember, Bob Backlund's a ringside, a guy that I really respect. And this is my first match here as this character. And, you know, we've done the run-ins and those types of things when I splashed Razor. But I had been around the business long enough to know the little tricks that can be played in a ring. You know, I can look, if I took you into the ring, I could make it look like I'm really trying hard and make you look bad just by a slow stutter step someplace on a crisscross, going up heavy for a body slam, things like that. And that's what he was doing. And this is my first night in. I know he's in tight with Vince.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a whole lot going on in this. And Scott, if you remember, used to have the spot where he'd put you down for the razor's edge, do his thing, and you backdrop him to the floor. Well, Scott was what, 265-ish, like, you know, a big guy, but he wasn't a monster guy. And I remember when I went to backdrop him, it was like trying to backdrop a Volkswagen over the road. And now the whole time, it was like the little stutter step on the crisscross earlier. Now there were other little things going in the match that my wheels are starting to turn. Like in our business where I come from, okay, you do that once, you got my attention, do it twice. Now you've really got my attention. And at some point beyond that, this is going to go a different way. And, but again, it's my first night in the ring as this guy. And, you know, I had never worked in a top spot like this for Vince, but I knew these guys were in tight with Vince. And I was sort of, I guess, giving Scott the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's nervous. Maybe he's off tonight for some reason. When we hit the floor, I go out to take a little bit of ECW towards him. And he says the slam. So I got to pick him up for a slam. And again, at 265, a guy that size shouldn't be hard to body slam. And I pick him up, and it's like picking like Bam Bam up dead asleep.
Yeah.
And their ring, their ring posts at the right where the post meets the mat, they had a square plate around it. So there's a pretty sharp side of this hanging out on the outside. So I pick him up and I run him into the post and I let him go. And he slid down, which of course scraped his back along the thing. Again, my way of saying easy way, hard way. We can do it either or. And we got through the rest of the match. And no real big problems that first night. But a month or two later, we were on a run where they were doing those days. They would fly you to point A, and then you drive all over God's creation and fly home from there. We were in doing television in Montreal at the Molson Center, which is now torn down. As I'm walking in, the Kliq is walking in, and in the old Molson Center, when you walked in the back door, there was a long, sloping, arced walkway that walked down, and there were two dressing rooms off to the left. I went to go into one of those dressing rooms, and Sean grabbed me and said, no, you dress with us. So I walked back out and I followed them down to the Zamboni machine on the other side, which is where the Montreal Canadiens dressed. And we walk in and it's just us in this dressing room. So I start opening my bag and get ready for the taping. Unbeknownst to me, the house in Montreal had been dropping. And Kevin Nash was now the world champion. And Carl Ouellet, Pierre the Pirate, was local from Montreal. Good guy, good hand, and blind in I think the right eye. So Sean, right in front of me, dressing room doors over here. I'm on the bench here. They're big Kevin standing right here, and Sean's looking up at him. I mean, 3 feet in front of me. And Sean says, so what are you going to do tonight? And Kevin said, well, Vince wants some kind of a hot finish so we can have a return. And Sean's response was, fuck what Vince wants. You're the world champion. You should beat this piece of shit or whatever condescending term he used. You should beat him with a jackknife, 1, 2, 3. And he kept pantomiming, jackknife, 1, 2, 3, counting out. And to be fair to Kevin, Kevin was going, well, if we do that, clean finish, can't have a return. And Sean said, let me ask you something. When you were working with world champions, as you were coming up, did you put them over clean? And Kevin said, well, yeah, but no, but he said, this guy ain't on your level. You should beat a jackknife, 1, 2, 3. And he turns to walk out. Right as he pulls the door open to walk out, Carl's walking in. And Sean, who's just been calling everything but a wrestler, he goes, hey, Carl, how you doing? And I'm watching, my attention goes there. Sean goes out and comes walking right back in the door. So now Kevin's standing right here. Carl's right here. And Sean has walked up behind him on his blind side. So, what am I watching here? This is strange. And Carl says, so what do you want to do tonight, Kev? And Kevin sort of wrestled with himself. He didn't just blurt it out. Meanwhile, Sean's behind him, silently going, keeps doing it over and over again, pantomiming him. So I'm watching and I'm going, what in the hell's going on here? And finally, Kevin goes, I was thinking jackknife, 1, 2, 3. And Carl goes, no, we can't. And he had been working his ass off, radio, television squads, getting the house up. And the house was up, I think, $60,000. So they go, Sean leaves. They go to get clarification from the agents. I went to get a draw. And when I walked in, Sean's already in the room, in the locker room. Carl walks and Kevin walk in behind. Sean jumps up on a bench. He goes, excuse me, everybody, can I have your attention? My name's Shawn Michaels. They call me the Heartbreak. They call me the Heartbreak Kid. This is Carl Ouellet. They call him Pierre the Pirate. Well, Pierre the Pirate is too big a star to do a job for our world champion. And Carl goes, Sean, what are you talking about? That's not what And now they start bickering, right? And everybody starts pulling them apart and everything. And I was traveling with Tammy, Chris, and Just Incredible, PJ.
Yeah.
We were staying at the Days Inn at the Montreal airport. And it was one of those hotels where the hotel desk is here, hallway, first door. I could probably touch the front desk because me and PJ were in the first room, Tammy and Chris in the second room. Was we get checked in and we're opening the door to go in, the Kliq walks in and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we're in room 107, whatever it was. Come down, we want to talk about what happened at the building tonight." So I went and got showered and cleaned up and got unpacked and everything. And I go down, they said they ordered pizza and beer. So I went down to the room. Kevin was laying on the couch. The rest of them were all sprawled around the room. And Sean goes, "What do you think about that shit that happened at the building tonight?" I said, "What shit?" He said, "With Carl not wanting to do the job." And I said, "Well, he didn't say he didn't want to do the job." I said, "Vince wanted a hot finish. You beat him clean, you can't have a return." And Sean goes, "See, I told you guys, Shane understands the business, but you have to understand, Shane, things are different here in WWF." And I went, like, what, like gravity falls up here? Like, I mean, these are pretty basic things in our business. And at that point, I think they were trying to assimilate me into the Kliq. And I've never been that kind of a guy. Like I try to get along with everybody. And they started and I can't recall specifically who said what, but they started like, "We should call Vince and tell him this, to do this to Carl, or we should tell him to do that to Carl." And this keeps going round and round. And Kevin picks the phone up, started dialing it, because he said, "Fuck it, let's just call Vince and tell him to fire him." And he starts dialing the phone. Sean or Scott, one of those two, walked over and hung the phone up. They said, "No, let's kick this around for a little bit." And now they start like one-upsmanship. Like, let's do this to him, let's do that to him. And I'm thinking to myself, you guys are being flown first class, limousine picking you up, getting lavished with big paychecks. Carl's out here trying to feed his family. And it just seems so smarmy to me. And finally, whichever one didn't hang the phone up, the other one finally said, "Fuck it, let's call Vince and tell him to starve him." And I remember I couldn't get out of that room fast enough. It was like I was watching a woman being raped or something. It disgusted me. And right after that, if you recall, Carl got sent to Memphis, I think, or one of the other territories. And, didn't deserve that. He ultimately wanted to do exactly what Vince McMahon, the boss, the owner, the guy that owns the company, wanted to do. And that one night started like opening my eyes as to like what was going on here, how much power had this Kliq amassed, and what they could do to somebody. And it was a little bit sobering.
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't long after that Sean gets attacked by Marines and all of this jazz. Yes. You win the Intercontinental title, you lose it. Then you come towards the end of the run, and I vividly recall this because I listened to it recently on WSI, the shoot interview that you've done with another guy from the UK. And it was the injury, you had your back injury. You basically, the doctor said, like, you're going to be paralyzed if you go out there. And Vince was just not having any of it in MSG. And then in the end, he made you cut a promo, just to go out there. Yes. So then you kind of went a bit ECW-esque on the promo. Let's just quickly get into that, and then we'll just move on to the last bit, which is WCW, your last run. Vince just seems like an asshole at this point, and I
would agree with that. I would concur. When there's a world-renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Richard Byer, telling you and your boss that I can enter a wheelchair for the rest of my life, that to me should take on. This ain't, "Hey, your back is sore," or "Hey, your knee is twisted," or whatever, "we can tape you up." That's a very serious thing. And unfortunately, unlike Vince, I'm not worth $9 billion. So if I end up in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, I can't feed my kids, put a roof over our head. And to me, though, the way that he's so nonchalant, he didn't even blink. He turned to me and said, "Dwight," came this close to me and asked me if I agree with that diagnosis. So yeah, I would concur. I'd say, pretty much a jackass.
Yeah, I would agree. I didn't like that when I listened to it. I was just like, that's just unbelievable. Yeah. Anyway, leave WWF. WCW last run, the new blood, and this was at the time when WCW it was starting to go. Let's be honest.
Right.
Russo was there. Whether Russo, we've had Vince Russo on the show before. He's been, he's Marmite. I always say there's a thing in England called Marmite, and it's either two things: you either love it or you hate it. And
right.
that's kind of where. Because with Vince Russo, for me, I think he's great. I could listen to Vince all day.
I get along great with Vince.
Yeah, Vince Russo, I think, is a great guy. And look, no matter what you think of him, he still changed the business in a lot of ways. So
sure.
you can't
yes.
really, But you go there, 2000, 2001, New Blood. Does it feel to you like it's on its knees at this point?
In some ways, yes. I mean, you could tell that the company had lost its luster.
Yeah.
But then you also could see that they had a pretty amazingly talented dressing room.
Yes.
And so now is the question of, can we get, at first it was Russo, then it was Russo, then it was Bischoff, and it was Russo and Bischoff. And there was that side of it where it seemed really cattywampus. But they had an incredibly talented dressing room. I'm a firm believer in talent. If you have a talented dressing room, at that point, and I talked about this before with TNA, at that point, it's a question of, will the person in charge be willing to listen to the people giving advice? And I think where they made their mistake, to be fair to WCW, was hiring Vince Russo and Bischoff together. Both of them have great assets and great liabilities, like anybody does. But now it was almost like there were two camps. There's this camp and that camp, and it created a lot of issues. There were times in the back when somebody said, well, why do I have to lose to him? Well, let's go get clarification. And this one would say this, and the other one would say that. And so there was a whole lot of this going on in the dressing room. And then other things that you would see going on would be, there'd be a whiteboard of matches that you're there all day getting ready for the shoot. And an hour or two before the shoot, Kevin would walk in and walk over, look at the board, and just erase that match and erase that match and add these matches. And it completely discombobulated the booking. I mean, when you're booking properly, there should be a thread that sort of runs through all of these things. And these matches should connect to the next match that make it make sense. And, by doing it was just like the overused phrase, the inmates running the asylum. That was very much the problem in WCW at that point.
Yeah, it certainly felt like, even watching it certainly felt that way. Yeah. Obviously, WCW gets purchased by WWE. Was it your wife that was pregnant at the time and you didn't go because of that? Was you going to make the jump again and try a third time in WWE?
Yes. What happened was, during that whole thing, when Vince Russo would say "my boys," he meant the Revolution.
Yes.
Dean, Chris, me, and Perry.
Yeah.
And we had done the angle where we were going to burn the American flag in the Palisades. And none of those other guys had yet been top heels like that. I could feel the heat in the building that night. There was money drawing heat there. Yeah. The fans, and I told those guys that night, don't go to the bar, don't go to the restaurant alone. If one of us goes somewhere, we all go together, because it was real palpable heat. And within a week or two, we were on the loop. We had a pay-per-view in Cincinnati and the TV taping the next day in Columbus, Ohio. And when we got to the building in Cincinnati, we were told that Kevin Sullivan had been given the book, and whoever had it prior to that was out, and there was this regime change. And I think by that time they put the world title on Chris Benoit.
Yeah.
And we had met. I'd never had any beef with Kevin. I'd always gotten along great with Kevin. Just because I'm friends with Chris didn't mean that I had to hate Kevin or vice versa. And so, for me, it seemed strange. I was being sucked into the middle of this thing, whether I wanted to be or not. And we had gone as a group. It was Conan, Ray, Perry, Dean, me, Chris, maybe Hoovy. I think Hoovy was there. There were 7 or 8 of us in the room that met with Bill I always get them wrong. Bill Banks was the guy that ran it, correct?
Yeah.
Or was it Bush?
Bill Bush.
Bill Bush. Bill Banks was the guy that
That's it.
Worked talent. Yes. So we went and met with Bill Bush, and I voiced to Bill the same thing I just voiced to you. I said, I've been friends with Kevin and I'm friends with Chris, but I feel like I'm being pulled in, like targeted in the middle because I work with Chris and I'm friends with Chris. And everybody in that room had said their piece. That was the extent of what I'd said in the meeting. Afterwards, they had come to me and asked me, because Terry Taylor was working in the office of WWF, and none of them knew him. I said, well, I can call Terry. I know Terry. So I called Terry and I said, hey, these guys are inquiring, about making the jump. And he said, give me 30 minutes and call me back. So I left the building, went outside on my cell phone. When I came back in, we had met and conversed and then come to a decision. And so I called Terry back from the payphone right outside the office where we had met with Bill Bush. And Chris Benoit, the rest had scattered by this time, but Chris was standing about, 10 feet away, waiting for me to get off the phone. And Mike Graham came up to him, and I see them talking at first. Now I'm on the phone talking with Terry Taylor, watching this, and I see Mike then get closer, get up in Chris's face, and goes like this, pulls out a Bowie knife, a big old Bowie knife, and puts it up in Chris's face and does this with it. And he's talking to him like this, and the whole time Chris is like this, and he walks away. So I get up the phone. I said, "What was that?" He goes, "This is Mike." I said, "What was with the knife?" He said, he told me that if he heard us mention Kevin Sullivan's name again, he would gut me. Now, this is a management making a threat to talent, right? Well, I went after him, and Chris stopped me. I said, let it go. And so we go the next day to television in, Knoxville, Columbus, Ohio. We walk in and we go to catering, and one by one, Doug Dillinger's coming in with cops and getting Chris and then Dean, one by one, pulling us all out and kicking us out of the building. So we're being told we're being fired. Well, good luck. I have a contract that I've not breached. So we went back to the hotel, and the flights weren't till that evening. Packed our stuff up, and we all went and met in the restaurant of the hotel. And I told them flat out, Conan was, again, all the same guys were that were in that meeting the day before. And I said, look, I'm going to say it as bluntly as I can. And I pointed to Guerrero, and I pointed, because he was there, and Chris. I said, Vince McMahon wants you, and he wants you. And I pointed to Dean. I said, he don't give a shit about you. Perry, don't give a shit. They sure as hell don't give a shit about me. So we either stick together, or we all, we either swing together, stick together, or we all swing individually. And so we go home, and we made the promise that night over 2 bottles of Beaujolais wine, which Chris loved to drink. He ordered the wine, to promise to share all information with each other, which was our MO. That's how we operated. So I get a phone call from Brother Love, Bruce Pritchard.
Yeah.
Wednesday of that week. This was Monday. By Wednesday of that week, I get a call from Pritchard telling us that Vince will take us all, and he's got plans to do this and do that. And I said, well, what kind of money are we? But he said, Vince needs you to tender your resignations before. And I said, well, none of them are going to tender resignations from these size of contracts until we have an idea of what we're talking about. And he said, well, legally, we're not allowed to be talking. Legally, we can't make you an offer right now because you're still under contract. I said, legally, you're not allowed to be talking to me right now, but we are. And only you and I know it. So give me an idea so I can take it back to the guys. And never heard another word. It was either that Friday or Saturday, I get a phone call from Vince Russo. And he said, now this is it. He said, mentioned about my wife being pregnant. That was pregnant with our oldest son now, Connor, but that was after almost 9 years of infertility and 2 miscarriages. So there was by no means like a guarantee we got a kid coming on the way with this. Dean was the one I was closest with through all those guys. And Dean was well aware, it's a lot of stress on the guy too. I mean, it's horrible for the woman, but the father's going through it too. And I couldn't bounce it off my wife because she was already under enough. So I was confiding in Dean. And so Dean had a pretty good idea of how important this was. And Russo called and said, asked me where I was. I said, I'm in Pittsburgh. He goes, are you sure about that? I said, do you want to talk to Carla? He goes, no. He said, I figured I better give you a heads up. I was going to call from the manager of the Ramada in Stanford. And he said, called me and said, my boys were there. So I assumed that he meant you guys. I said, well, I'm here. He said, he said, you might want to just check the cover yourself. So I called Dean straight away, answered the first ring. And I said to him, where are you? And he said, I'm at the beach house with Julie and Larissa, his daughter, and his wife and daughter, respectively. And I said, are you sure? I said the same thing. I said, are you sure about that? He goes, yeah. He said, why? So I said, well, this is what I heard. And, he said, he swore to me on his wife and daughter. He said, I swear to you on Julie and Larissa, I'm at the beach house. So I called Vince back. I said, I haven't spoken to anybody else, but I'll bet my life that Dean's in Florida. Because I don't want to call anybody a liar. You might want to call the hotel to make sure your ass is covered. So about an hour passed. I hung up and I did make the call. My wife came in and she said, have you called yet? And I said, no. And she said, why not? I said, if I call and they're not there, I'm going to feel like a piece of shit that I didn't trust my friends. And if I call and find out they are there, I'll lose my mind. And she said, if you call and they're not there, only you, she said, only you, me, and this baby know that you made that call. And I figured, well, she's right. So I called. Guy answered the phone, turned out to be a big franchise fan. And I said, I'm looking for some friends of mine. Can you tell me if any of them checked in? He said, like who? I said, well, Chris Benoit. He punched around here. Oh, yeah, Chris checked in a little while ago. I said, how about Perry Saturn? Perry Saturn. Or then I called myself, I said, Perry Satullo. And he typed around here, and he checked in last night or whatever. And I said, how about Dean Malenko? And, my throat's tight, my asshole's tight. And I'm thinking, please don't let him be there. And of course he goes, no Dean Malenko. At least he didn't lie to me, right? So I asked a few other names, and he said, yeah, they're here. And right as we hung up, for some reason, it popped into my head. Dean would always use Dean Malenko on the road. But when he wanted to kayfabe, he would use Shelly Simon. So I said, before you hang up, I said, can you tell me if you have a Simon checked in? He punched around. He went, yes, but it's a woman. I said, is it Shelly Simon by chance? He goes, yeah, how'd you know? So I hang up and I call Dean back, right? It goes to voicemail. I leave a little bit of a scathing voicemail on there. And now I'm getting stuck. They're going, right? WCW has now fired us or tried. And so I'm sort of like in no man's land here. And so my attorney had to fight it out with the lead counsel in WCW, Dinah Myers. And she kept telling me that I had to sign this release and I had to this and had to that. So I haven't done anything to breach the contract. And I don't see anybody standing next to me with a gun telling me I'm going to sign anything. So our take on it was they were in breach of contract, and my lawyer gave him 2 weeks to resolve it, or he's going to file a federal lawsuit for breach of contract. And they started paying again. And that was the end of that with as far as we've gone. Now, like a month later, I got a letter from Dean saying that he valued our friendship, whatever, but he wasn't honest with me because he was afraid I would stooge them off. So I'm your friend, but I don't trust you. And that didn't sit well for a long time. We have since talked, and it's long since been water under the bridge. But it was just a really heady time because I think had they gone, and pretty much what I said was going to happen did. Perry was in dresses and things like that. Eddie and Chris both got big pushes, and the rest were pretty sort of like bylines to it.
Yeah, they were indeed. We're going to wrap it up there, Shane, because we appreciate the time is ticking on. I've sat here and listened. I can't thank you enough for coming on. For me, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor. I'm sure it will be. Guys, this has been the Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast. That has been the franchise, Shane Douglas. I have been your host, Adam Cousins. And until next time, everybody, stay safe and buckle down.